No one wants you here, my brother sneered, his words cutting deeper than the winter chill. Behind him, my mother's face remained impassive as she nodded in silent agreement, rain soaking through my thin jacket as my suitcase sat heavy by my feet. That moment of rejection would change everything. 5 years later, as I step out of my private car onto the red carpet, their desperate text messages light up my phone, begging for a chance to be part of my success. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The day my life shattered began like any other Tuesday. I was working my shift at the local diner, the smell of grease and coffee clinging to my uniform as I rushed between tables. My phone buzzed in my apron pocket, and I snuck a glance during a rare quiet moment. Eviction notice, 3 days to vacate. The text from my roommate Natalie was accompanied by a photo of the official notice taped to our apartment door. My stomach dropped. We'd been struggling to make rent for months, but our landlord had promised to work with us. That promise, like so many others I'd heard, had evaporated. "Vanessa, Table 8 needs their check." My manager's voice snapped me back to reality. I shoved my phone away and plastered on a smile, but my mind was racing. 3 days to find a new place with barely $200 to my name. The weight of my art school loans hung around my neck like an anchor, dragging me deeper into financial despair with each passing month. By the time my shift ended at 11 p.m., dark clouds had gathered, matching my mood. Fat raindrops began to fall as I trudged toward the bus stop, my uniform jacket doing little to shield me from the downpour. The bus was late, as usual, and by the time I reached our apartment, I was soaked to the bone. Natalie sat cross-legged on our bare living room floor, surrounded by boxes. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her voice was steady. "My sister said I can crash with her in Seattle until I find a place," she said, not looking up from the pile of clothes she was sorting. "What about you?" I sank down onto our second-hand couch, water dripping from my hair onto the worn fabric. "I don't know," I admitted. The truth was, I had nowhere to go. My friends were all struggling artists or service workers like me, living paycheck to paycheck in shared apartments with no space for a desperate roommate. There was only one option, the one I'd been avoiding for years. I would have to call my family. The relationship with my family had always been complicated. Growing up in a small Midwestern town, I'd always been the odd one out, dreaming of big cities and art galleries while my parents and brother valued practicality and tradition. When I received a partial scholarship to art school in New York, my father called it a waste of money. My mother suggested a teaching degree instead. My brother Dominic, the golden child with his business degree and stable job at my father's construction company, had laughed and said I'd be back within a year, begging for help. I'd promised myself I'd never prove them right. For 3 years, I'd scraped by in New York, working multiple jobs while pursuing my passion for digital art. I'd cut contact with my family after a particularly nasty fight, when my father had demanded I come home and get a real job. The silence between us had stretched into years, broken only by the occasional stilted birthday call with my mother. Now, with nowhere else to turn, I swallowed my pride and dialed my parents' number. Each ring sent my heart rate climbing higher. Finally, my mother's voice, cautious and distant, answered. "Hello? Mom, it's me, Vanessa." My voice cracked slightly. I need help." There was a long pause. I could hear my father's voice in the background, asking who was calling. My mother's muffled response. Then my father's heavy footsteps approaching the phone. "Vanessa." His voice was gruff, unchanged, after all these years. "What's wrong?" I explained the situation as briefly as possible, trying to keep the desperation from my voice. "I just need a place to stay for a few weeks until I can save up for a new apartment. I can help around the house, and I'll be out of your way as soon as—" "Your old room is still there," my father interrupted. "You can stay until you figure things out." Relief washed over me. Thank you, Dad. I'll book a bus ticket for tomorrow. I'll send you the money for a flight, he said after a moment. No sense in you taking a bus for 16 hours. The unexpected kindness brought tears to my eyes. Thank you, I whispered. The next day, I packed my meager belongings into a single suitcase and a backpack. All my art supplies and my laptop, the tools of my freelance work, went into my carry-on. I said goodbye to Natalie with promises to stay in touch, then headed to the airport. The flight back to my hometown felt like traveling backwards in time. As the plane descended over the familiar landscape of rolling fields and small clusters of houses, anxiety knotted in my stomach. I'd left this place determined to prove myself, to show that my dreams were valid. Now I was returning, tail between my legs, exactly as they'd predicted. My father was waiting at the small regional airport, his imposing figure easy to spot in the modest crowd. His hair had more gray than I remembered, and new lines creased his weathered face. He nodded when he saw me taking my suitcase without a word. The drive home was filled with awkward silence, broken only by his occasional comments about changes in town, the new shopping center, the old Miller farm being sold to developers, the high school football team's chances this season. I responded with non-committal sounds, watching the familiar landscape roll by. Our house looked exactly the same, a 2-story colonial with white siding and dark green shutters. My mother was waiting on the porch, her arms crossed against the November chill. She gave me a stiff hug, patting my back awkwardly before stepping away. "You're thin," she observed, her eyes scanning me critically. "Are you eating properly?" Before I could answer, the front door opened, and my brother Dominic appeared. His expression darkened when he saw me. "So the prodigal daughter returns," he said, leaning against the door frame. "Crashed and burned in the big city, huh?" "Dominic," my father warned, but there was no real rebuke in his tone. "It's just temporary," I said, straightening my shoulders. "I'll be out of your hair soon." Dominic smirked. "Sure you will." Inside, the house smelled of pot roast and furniture polish, the sense of my childhood. My mother had kept my room exactly as I'd left it, down to the art posters on the walls and the purple bedspread. It was both comforting and suffocating, a shrine to the girl I used to be. "Dinner's at 6, my mother said, hovering in the doorway. "Your father has some ideas about jobs you might apply for." "I have a job," I said, setting my laptop on the desk. "I do freelance digital art and design. I just need to build my client base." My mother's lips thinned. "A real job, Vanessa. Something stable." I bit back a retort, reminding myself that I was here on their charity. "I'll be down for dinner," I said instead. Once alone, I sat heavily on the bed, the reality of my situation crashing down on me. I was 25 years old, back in my childhood bedroom, with no money, no apartment, and a family that had never believed in me. The urge to curl up and cry was overwhelming, but I couldn't afford that luxury. I had to figure out a way forward. Over the next few days, an uneasy routine established itself. I spent my days hunched over my laptop, applying for remote design jobs and reaching out to potential clients. My parents spent their evenings suggesting real job openings: administrative assistant at my father's company, receptionist at my uncle's dental practice, substitute teacher at the local elementary school. Tension simmered just below the surface, erupting occasionally over dinner. My father couldn't understand why I wouldn't just take the sure-thing job he was offering. My mother lamented the money wasted on my art education. Dominic watched these exchanges with smug satisfaction, occasionally throwing in a comment about how he'd been promoted twice since graduating with his business degree. A week into my stay, I received an email that changed everything. A small tech startup in California had seen my portfolio online and wanted to commission a series of illustrations for their new app. The pay was more than I'd made in 3 months at the diner. That night at dinner, I shared my news, hoping for some Acknowledgement, some sign that they understood this was my path. "That's nice, dear," my mother said, passing the mashed potatoes. "But you know these internet things aren't reliable. Mr. Johnson is still looking for someone at the bank. Very stable position." "Mom, this is a real job," I insisted. "It could lead to more contracts, build my portfolio." "Drawing pictures? For phone games isn't a career," Dominic interrupted, stabbing at his roast beef. "Dad's offering you a position people would kill for, with benefits and everything." "I don't want to work construction administration," I said, my patience wearing thin. "I'm a digital artist. That's my profession." My father set down his fork with a clatter. "A profession that left you homeless and broke. Be realistic, Vanessa. It's time to grow up and accept responsibility." The words stung, but I held my ground. I am being responsible. I'm building a career doing what I'm good at, what I love. "Love doesn't pay the bills," my father said, his voice rising. "This artistic fantasy of yours, it's not a fantasy." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I pushed back my chair, hands trembling. "Just because none of you understand or support me doesn't make my dreams invalid." The table fell silent. My mother stared at her plate. My father's face had turned red. Dominic looked between us, a strange gleam in his eye. "Maybe," Dominic said slowly. "Vanessa doesn't really want to be here. Maybe she just needs our money until she can run back to her failing art career." My mother's head snapped up. "Dominic, am I wrong?" He turned to me. "You've always thought you were better than us, haven't you? Too good for this town, too special for a normal job." "That's not true," I said, but the words came out weak. "Then prove it," he challenged. "Take Dad's job offer. Commit to staying here, being part of this family, this community. Stop chasing pipe dreams." I looked around the table, at my father's stern face, my mother's worried eyes, Dominic's challenging stare. In that moment, I realized a fundamental truth. They would never understand me, never fully accept my choices or believe in my abilities. "I can't do that," I said quietly. "This isn't who I am." Dominic pushed back from the table. "Then maybe you shouldn't be here at all." "Dominic," my father warned, but there was hesitation in his voice. "No, Dad. We've been dancing around this for days." Dominic turned to me, his expression cold. "No one wants you here, Vanessa. Not if you're going to keep throwing our help back in our faces." I looked to my mother, hoping for some defense, some show of support. Instead, she lowered her eyes and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The world seemed to stop. My own mother agreeing that I wasn't wanted. The rejection cut deeper than I'd thought possible. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. "I'll be gone by morning." That night, as rain pattered against my bedroom window, I made calls and sent emails to everyone I knew. By midnight, I had a couch to crash on in Chicago with a former classmate and a bus ticket purchased with the last of my savings. As I packed my bags, I made a promise to myself. I would never again put myself in a position where I needed my family's help. I would succeed on my own terms, prove them all wrong, and never look back. The next morning, I stood in the doorway with my suitcase, rain beginning to fall as dark clouds gathered overhead. The scene was set for the moment that would change everything. The moment when my family's rejection would become the catalyst for my greatest transformation. The rain intensified as I dragged my suitcase down the driveway. Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of rejection pressing down on my shoulders. I hadn't expected a tearful goodbye, but some part of me had hoped, foolishly it seemed, that someone would stop me, that my mother would rush out with an apology, or my father would call me back. The house remained silent behind me, curtains drawn. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from my father. Bus leaves at 9. Don't miss it. No goodbye. No take care. Just a cold reminder of my departure schedule. I shoved the phone back into my pocket without responding and continued walking. The bus station was 3 miles away, and in the pouring rain, it might as well have been 30. Cars passed me by, drivers glancing curiously at the soaked young woman walking along the shoulder with a suitcase. In a town this small, they probably recognized me as Frank Wilson's daughter, the one who'd run off to New York with big dreams. Now they could add a new chapter to their gossip. The failure who crawled home and was sent packing again. After half a mile, my arms ached from dragging the suitcase through puddles and mud. My sneakers were soaked through, each step producing a squelching sound. A car horn blared behind me, making me jump. I turned to see an old blue pickup truck pulling alongside me. The window rolled down, revealing a familiar face I hadn't seen in years. "Vanessa, what are you doing out in this weather?" Mrs. Rivera, my high school art teacher, peered at me with concern. Age had silvered her once dark hair, but her eyes were as kind as I remembered. "I'm heading to the bus station," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She frowned, taking in my drenched appearance and the suitcase. "Get in, I'll drive you." Too exhausted to argue, I accepted her help, loading my suitcase into the truck bed before climbing into the passenger seat. The warmth of the heater hit me like a physical embrace. "Thank you," I managed, suddenly fighting tears. Mrs. Rivera, Elena, she'd always asked me to call her after graduation, drove in silence for a few minutes, giving me time to compose myself. Finally, she spoke. "I heard you were back in town. I was hoping you'd stop by the studio." After retiring from teaching, Elena had opened a small art studio where she taught classes and displayed local artists' work. It had been a dream of hers for years. "I wasn't planning to stay long," I said, staring out the window at the rain-blurred landscape. "And now?" Her question was gentle but direct. The dam broke. Through halting words and occasional tears, I told her everything. The eviction, coming home, the disastrous week with my family, and finally, tonight's rejection. Elena listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "They've never understood you," she said finally as we approached the bus station. "Your talent scared them." I snorted. "My talent has left me broke and homeless." "For now," she corrected. "Art is a marathon, not a sprint. You know that." We pulled into the parking lot. Through the rain-streaked windshield, I could see the small bus terminal, its fluorescent lights harsh against the dark evening. "Your bus isn't for another 2 hours," Elena observed, checking the dashboard clock. "Come home with me, have some dinner and dry off before your trip." Her kindness almost undid me completely. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Elena's house was a small craftsman bungalow on the outskirts of town, surrounded by gardens that, even in the rain and darkness, hinted at their spring glory. Inside, the walls were covered with artwork, some her own, others clearly from former students. I recognized a few of my own pieces from high school, prominently displayed in the hallway. "You kept these?" I asked, staring at a charcoal drawing I'd done at 17. "Of course. You were one of my most promising students." She handed me a towel and some dry clothes. "Bathroom's down the hall. Get changed while I heat up some soup." 20 minutes later, dressed in borrowed clothes with my hair wrapped in a towel, I sat at Elena's kitchen table cradling a bowl of homemade vegetable soup. For the first time in days, the knot in my chest began to loosen. "I've been following your work online," Elena said, sitting across from me with her own bowl. "Those animations you did for that indie game developer were impressive." I nearly choked on my soup. "You've seen those?" She smiled. "I may be old, but I know how to use Instagram. Your digital work has evolved beautifully." The simple acknowledgement of my professional growth, something my family had never bothered to notice, warmed me more than the soup. It hasn't been enough, though, I admitted. Not enough to pay New York rent. New York isn't the only place with opportunities, Elena said thoughtfully, especially now, with remote work becoming more common. She rose and disappeared into another room, returning with a laptop. After a few minutes of typing, she turned the screen toward me. The Chicago Art Institute is hosting a digital arts residency program, 3 months stipend included with housing. Her eyes gleamed. The deadline is next week. I leaned forward, scanning the details. It was perfect. A legitimate opportunity to work on my portfolio while having my basic needs covered. The competition would be fierce, but I don't have a proper portfolio ready, I said, doubt creeping in. And I need references. You have work samples online, don't you? As for references, she smiled. I'd be honored to write one. And I'm still in touch with Professor Matthews from the community college. He always spoke highly of your potential. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of hope sparked within me. Do you really think I have a chance? I think you have. Incredible talent that's being wasted while you doubt yourself, Elena said firmly. Your family's inability to see your value doesn't diminish it. The words struck like a physical blow, not painful, but awakening. I'd spent years trying to prove myself to people who were fundamentally incapable of appreciating what I had to offer. Why couldn't they support me like this? I whispered, more to myself than to Elena. Why couldn't they just believe in me? Elena's expression softened. Some people are threatened by dreams they don't understand. Your brother chose a safe path, following in your father's footsteps, staying in the same town, maintaining the status quo. Your choices challenged all of that. By wanting to be an artist? It seemed absurd. By daring to want something different, she corrected. By having the courage to pursue a path with no guarantees. That kind of courage makes people uncomfortable. It forces them to question their own choices. I thought about Dominic's smug satisfaction when I returned home defeated. About my mother's silence when he told me no one wanted me there. About the subtle ways they'd undermined my confidence all week, pushing me toward the safe, acceptable options they'd chosen. You're right, I said slowly. They want me to fail because my success would mean they were wrong. The realization was both painful and liberating. Their rejection wasn't about my worth, it was about their insecurities. Their betrayal, particularly my mother's silent agreement with Dominic's cruel words, had been brewing for years, built on a foundation of fear rather than love. Elena reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Use that insight. Let it free you, rather than hold you back. By the time we returned to the bus station, I had a plan. I would go to Chicago as intended, crash on my classmate's couch, and pour everything into my application for the residency program. I would build a future on my own terms. Standing at the bus platform, I hugged Elena tightly. I don't know how to thank you. Succeed, she said simply. That's all the thanks I need. As the bus pulled away from my hometown, I didn't look back. The betrayal still stung, perhaps it always would, but it no longer defined me. My family had made their choice. Now I would make mine. The journey to Chicago took 16 hours, with multiple transfers through the night. I used the time to start organizing my portfolio, selecting my strongest pieces and planning new works that would showcase my range. By the time we reached the city, exhaustion had been replaced by determination. My classmate Zoe greeted me at the station with a hug and a large coffee. You look like you need this, she said, handing me the steaming cup. You have no idea, I replied, taking a grateful sip. Zoe's apartment was a tiny studio in a massive complex on the city's north side. The fold-out couch that would be my bed for the foreseeable future took up most of the living space when extended. It's not much, Zoe apologized as she helped me settle in. It's perfect, I assured her. After the past week, any space where I was welcome felt like luxury. That afternoon, while Zoe was at work, I received a text from my mother. "Your brother didn't mean what he said. You're welcome to come back if you apologize." The message was so tone-deaf it would have been laughable if it hadn't been so hurtful. Apologize? For what? For pursuing my dreams? For refusing to conform to their narrow vision of success? I started to type several responses, each more heated than the last, but ultimately deleted them all. Instead, I simply wrote, "I'm where I need to be." Then I blocked the number. Later that evening, as Zoe and I shared takeout Chinese food, she asked about my plans. "First, I need a job," I said. "Any job. Then I'm applying for this residency program." I showed her the details on my phone. Zoe's eyes widened. "That's incredible, but super competitive." "I know, but I have to try." She raised her soda, can in a toast. "To trying," she said, "and to leaving toxic family in the rear view." I clinked my can against hers. "To new beginnings." That night, lying on the fold-out couch, listening to the unfamiliar city sounds, I replayed the scene in my parents' dining room. "No one wants you here," Dominic had said. My mother's small nod of agreement. The pain was still there, a hollow ache in my chest, but something else was growing alongside it, a fierce determination. They had betrayed me, turned their backs when I needed them most, but in doing so, they had unknowingly set me free. I made a promise to myself in the darkness. I would transform this betrayal into the foundation of my success. One day, they would see exactly what they had rejected, and when that day came, I would be ready. Finding work in Chicago proved harder than I'd anticipated. My New York diner experience meant little in a city already saturated with service workers. After a week of pounding the pavement, I secured a position at a coffee shop 8 blocks from Zoe's apartment. The pay was minimal, the hours brutal, but it was something. Each morning, I woke at 4:30 a.m. to make the opening shift. By 2 p.m., I'd clock out, my feet aching and clothes smelling of espresso. I'd walk home regardless of weather, saving the bus fare, then spend the evening hunched over my laptop working on my portfolio for the residency application. "You should come out tonight," Zoe urged one Friday evening as she applied mascara. "For a gallery opening. All work and no play makes Vanessa a dull artist." I shook my head, eyes fixed on the digital illustration I was refining. "Deadline's in 5 days. I need to finish this piece." Zoe sighed but didn't push further. She understood the stakes. The residency application consumed me. I revised my artist statement 20 times, curated my portfolio obsessively, and recorded a video introduction with borrowed equipment from Zoe's workplace. Elena and Professor Matthews submitted glowing recommendations. I poured every ounce of creativity and determination into the application, working until my eyes burned and my hand cramped around my stylus. The day after submitting, I arrived at the coffee shop to find my hours had been cut in half. "Business is slow," the manager explained, not meeting my eyes. Nothing personal. That night, I calculated my finances. Even with extreme frugality, I couldn't afford to contribute fairly to Zoe's rent. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I was on the verge of another crisis just weeks after the last. "You can stay," Zoe insisted when I confessed my situation. "Just cover utilities until you get more hours." Her generosity was touching, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was becoming a burden. Again. The rejection email from the residency program arrived 2 weeks later. "While your work shows promise," the form letter began, "we regret to inform you that we cannot offer you a position at this time." I stared at the screen, numb. I'd pinned everything on this opportunity. My hopes, my plans, my self-worth. The rejection felt like the final confirmation that my family had been right all along. I was chasing a fantasy, destined to fail. That night, Alone in Zoe's apartment, I hit bottom. Curled on the fold-out couch, I sobbed until my throat was raw. I'd failed in New York. I'd been rejected by my family. Now I'd failed in Chicago, too. My lifelong dream of making a living through my art seemed childish and delusional. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider giving up. Maybe I should swallow my pride, call my father, and accept that job in his company. At least I'd have stability, benefits, a future without constant financial anxiety. What was pride worth if it left me homeless and hungry? With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and unblocked my parents' numbers. My thumb hovered over my father's contact. One call could end this struggle. One admission of defeat, one apology for my stubbornness, and I could have safety again. A notification popped up on my screen. A new email. Probably another bill I couldn't afford to pay. I almost ignored it, but something made me check. Ms. Wilson, the email began. I recently viewed your portfolio website and was impressed by your digital illustrations. I represent Horizon Gaming, a mid-size indie studio in Pittsburgh. We're seeking a freelance artist for character design work on our upcoming project. I read the email 3 times, convinced it was spam or some cruel joke, but the sender's address matched Horizon Gaming's website. The pay offered was modest but fair, enough to cover rent and basic expenses. The project timeline was 4 months, with potential for extension. I sent a response immediately, trying to contain my excitement. Within an hour, I received a reply with more details and a request for a video call the following day. That night, I barely slept. The possibility of legitimate work in my field, coming at my lowest moment, felt like the universe throwing me a lifeline. I couldn't afford to mess this up. The video call with Sam, Horizon's art director, went surprisingly well. He was frank about the project's constraints, tight deadlines, specific art direction, minimal revisions, but seemed genuinely impressed with my portfolio. Your style has the quality we're looking for, he said. Clean, expressive, but with that slight edge that makes it distinctive. 2 days later, I signed the contract. It wasn't a dream job. It was better. It was real, paying work doing what I loved. I expected the validation to heal the wounds of my family's rejection. Instead, it highlighted just how deep those wounds ran. Even as I celebrated this small victory, a voice in the back of my mind, suspiciously, similar to my brother's, whispered that it was temporary, that real success remained out of reach, that I was still one setback away from failure. Zoe noticed my subdued reaction to the good news. I thought you'd be over the moon, she said, puzzled. I am, I insisted. It's just, I don't know if it's enough. She frowned. Enough for what? The question stopped me short. Enough for what, indeed? Enough to prove my worth to my family? Enough to validate my life choices? Enough to silence the doubts they'd planted in my mind? I don't know, I admitted. I just feel like I need to achieve something bigger, something undeniable, to make this all worthwhile. Zoe's expression softened. You know that's them talking, right? Your family. They've got you believing you need some grand success to justify your existence. Her words hit with uncomfortable accuracy. Even hundreds of miles away, my family's expectations and judgments were controlling my reactions, stealing joy from my accomplishments. That night, I sat by Zoe's window, watching the city lights, confronting the truth. I wasn't just fighting for financial stability or professional recognition. I was fighting to reclaim my self-worth from the people who had systematically undermined it. The realization was both painful and liberating. My family's betrayal ran deeper than that moment of rejection at the dining room table. It had shaped my entire perception of myself and my value. Now, I had to unlearn those toxic beliefs while simultaneously building a career and a life. The next day, I dove into my first assignments for Horizon. The work was challenging, designing characters for a fantasy RPG with very specific aesthetic requirements. For the first few days, I struggled, submitting concepts that Sam rejected with diplomatic but firm feedback. "These are good," he said during our weekly check-in call, "but they're too safe. We need something more distinctive." His words echoed my own inner critic. Too safe. Always playing it safe. Never taking the risks that might lead to something truly great. That evening, I shut off my phone, disconnected from the internet, and let myself create without constraints. I abandoned the careful, technically proficient style I'd developed in art school, the style that had earned me praise but never passion. Instead, I drew from the raw, emotional energy that had sustained me through these difficult months. The characters that emerged were unlike anything I'd created before. Edgier, more stylized, with a distinctive visual language that felt uniquely mine. When I finally stopped, hours later, my hand was cramping and my eyes burned, but I knew I'd broken, through something. The next morning I sent the new concepts to Sam, bracing for rejection. His response came within the hour. "This is what we've been looking for. Keep going in this direction." For the first time since leaving my parents' house, I felt a genuine surge of pride. Not because someone else had validated my work, but because I'd pushed past my own self-imposed limitations and found something authentic. The next few weeks fell into a demanding but fulfilling rhythm. I continued working part-time at the coffee shop while dedicating my evenings to the Horizon project. The work was creatively challenging, but financially stabilizing. I was able to contribute properly to Zoe's rent, and even begin setting aside small amounts for my own place. But as my professional life improved, my emotional state remained fragile. Nightmares plagued my sleep, dreams where I stood before my family, showing them my work, only to have them laugh or turn away in disgust. I'd wake in a cold sweat, the echo of their rejection fresh in my mind. During one particularly difficult night, after a dream where my mother literally turned her back as I called her name, I found myself scrolling through social media at 3 a.m. Without thinking, I looked up my brother's profile. The most recent post showed him receiving an award from the local business association. My father stood beside him, beaming with pride. My mother had commented, "So proud of our son," following in his father's footsteps and exceeding expectations. The knife twisted deeper. I had never received such unequivocal pride from her, not even when I earned my scholarship to art school. For them, success had a very specific definition, and my path would never qualify. I closed the app and set my phone aside, tears burning in my eyes. The ache of their rejection felt fresh again, a wound reopened. In that moment, I fully understood the depth of my emotional low point. It wasn't just financial instability or professional uncertainty. It was the grief of losing the family I'd always hoped would eventually understand me. "You okay?" Zoe's voice came from the darkness. She'd gotten up for water and noticed me awake. "Not really," I admitted. "I looked up my family online. Bad idea." She sat beside me on the edge of the fold-out couch. "Want to talk about it?" The words spilled out, about the social media post, about my mother's comment, about the dreams that haunted me. "I should be over this by now," I finished, wiping my eyes. "It's pathetic how much it still hurts." "It's not pathetic," Zoe said firmly. "It's human. They were supposed to love you unconditionally. Instead, they made their love conditional on you becoming someone you're not." Her words crystallized something I'd been struggling to articulate. I keep thinking if I achieve enough, they'll finally see me, really see me. "Maybe they will, maybe they won't," Zoe said gently. "But is that really why you're doing this? For them?" The question lingered in the air between us. Was I building this new life for myself? Or was I still seeking validation from people who had fundamental blind spots when it came to my worth? "I don't know," I whispered. Figure it out, Zoe advised. Because if you're doing all this just to prove them wrong, you're still letting them control your life. After she returned to bed, I sat in the darkness, confronting the truth of her words. My family's rejection had created a void in me, a desperate need for validation that I'd been trying to fill with achievement. But that approach had left me vulnerable, tying my self-worth to external recognition. If I was going to truly rise from this low point, I needed to redefine success on my own terms. I needed to create for the joy of creation, build a career that fulfilled me, and find validation from within, rather than from those who had proven themselves incapable of providing it. As dawn broke over Chicago, I made another promise to myself. I would no longer measure my worth by my family's standards. I would build a life that was authentically mine, whether they ever approved or not. It was the first step in a longer journey, one that would lead me out of the darkness and toward a future I could barely imagine. But in that moment of clarity, amid the pain and uncertainty, I felt the first glimmer of true healing begin. My work for Horizon Gaming became a sanctuary. Each character design allowed me to channel my emotions into something tangible, something valuable. Sam's feedback was constructive rather than crushing, helping me refine my skills without undermining my confidence. For the first time in my professional life, I felt respected as an artist. "We've been getting great responses to your designs," Sam told me during our monthly review call. The lead developer specifically mentioned how well they translate into the game mechanics. The praise was gratifying, but I was careful not to let it become my only source of validation. I'd learned that lesson the hard way. 3 months into the contract, Sam invited me to join a video meeting with the entire development team. I assumed it was a routine update until I noticed the atmosphere. The team seemed unusually excited, exchanging knowing glances as we waited for everyone to join. "As you all know," the project director began, "Horizon has been selected to showcase our upcoming game at Indie Expo next month in San Francisco. It's a huge opportunity for visibility, especially with potential investors." My stomach tightened. This was big news for the studio, but I wasn't sure what it had to do with me as a freelancer. "We'll need our key team members there," he continued. "That includes you, Vanessa." I nearly dropped my coffee mug. "Me? But I'm not staff. I'm just a freelance artist." Sam jumped in. "You're not just anything. Your character designs have become central to the game's identity. We need you there to discuss your creative process, maybe do some live demonstrations for attendees." The offer was unexpected and intimidating. A major industry event, all expenses paid, with the opportunity to showcase my work to a wider audience. It was the kind of opportunity that could transform a freelance gig into a career. "I'd need to request time off from the coffee shop," I said, mind racing. "About that," Sam replied, his expression turning serious. "This might be a good time to discuss your future with Horizon. We're impressed with your work, Vanessa. The contract was originally for 4 months, but we'd like to extend it, potentially as a full-time position rather than freelance." The words hung in the air, momentous and life-changing. A full-time position doing what I loved, stability without compromise. The validation of having my work recognized not just as adequate, but as valuable enough to secure a permanent role. "I'd need to think about it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the elation bubbling inside me. Moving to Pittsburgh would be a big step. "Actually," Sam said, "we've been transitioning to a hybrid model since the pandemic. You could work remotely most of the time, with quarterly visits to the studio. We have team members in 5 different cities now." It was almost too perfect, the exact balance of independence and connection I'd been seeking. As the meeting concluded, I sat in Zoe's apartment, stunned by the turn of events. After months of struggle and doubt, a clear path forward had suddenly emerged. "You have to take it," Zoe declared when I told her the news. This is everything you've been working for. What if it doesn't work out? I countered, the old insecurities rising. What if they realize I'm not as good as they think? Zoe shook her head firmly. That's your family talking again. These people have seen your work, Vanessa. They've been paying you for months. This isn't charity or luck. You've earned this. That night, I called Elena to share the news. Her response was immediate and emotional. I knew it, she said, her voice thick with pride. I always knew you had something special. You just needed someone to see it. The conversation with Elena reinforced what I'd begun to understand. My talent hadn't changed between my family's rejection and Horizon's offer. The only difference was being in an environment where that talent was recognized and valued. I accepted the position and the invitation to Indie Expo. 2 weeks later, I gave notice at the coffee shop and began preparations for the trip to San Francisco. The timing couldn't have been better. Zoe had decided to move in with her girlfriend, which meant I needed to find a new living situation anyway. You could get your own place now, Zoe suggested as we sorted through my meager belongings. A real apartment, not just a couch. The idea was tempting, but I remained cautious. Let's see how the expo goes first. I want some savings before I commit to a lease. The flight to San Francisco was my first time on a plane since the desperate journey from New York to my parents' home. The contrast wasn't lost on me. Then I'd been broken, returning to a place where I wasn't truly welcome. Now, I was traveling to represent a game studio that valued my contributions enough to put me in front of industry professionals. Sam met me at the airport, immediately recognizable from our video calls. In person, his enthusiasm was even more infectious. Wait until you see the booth setup, he said as we headed to the hotel. Your artwork is front and center in our marketing materials. The character designs have become our visual signature. The hotel was another surprise. Not a budget chain, but a stylish boutique property walking distance from the convention center. My room was small but elegant, with a view of the city skyline that took my breath away. That evening, the Horizon team gathered for dinner. Meeting colleagues I'd only known through screens was surreal, but comfortable. They treated me not as an outsider or a temporary contributor, but as an integral part of the team. The creative director raised a toast to my distinctive visual language that had elevated the entire project. The warmth of their welcome was the opposite of the cold rejection I'd experienced from my family. These people had no obligation to me, no biological ties, no history, yet they recognized and celebrated what my own relatives couldn't see. The first day of Indie Expo was overwhelming. Thousands of attendees, hundreds of exhibitors, all dedicated to independent game development. The Horizon booth was modest compared to some, but the quality of our display drew consistent traffic. I found myself explaining my design process to curious visitors, showcasing character iterations, and even doing quick digital sketches on a display tablet. You're a natural, Sam observed during a quiet moment. The way you communicate your creative decisions, it's compelling. His comment took me by surprise. I'd never thought of myself as particularly articulate about my work. Art had always been my refuge precisely because it allowed me to express things I couldn't put into words. On the second day, during a scheduled demonstration, I noticed a tall woman watching intently from the edge of the crowd. Unlike most attendees, she wasn't taking photos or asking questions. She simply observed, her gaze analytical. When the demonstration ended, she approached me directly. Interesting stylistic choices, she said without introduction. The angular features balanced with those fluid lines creates a distinctive tension. Deliberate? The question was perceptive, targeting aspects of my design philosophy I hadn't articulated even to myself. Yes, I admitted. I wanted to reflect the character's internal conflicts visually. She nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer. I'm Maya Lin, creative director at Prism Interactive. Do you have a card? I fumbled in my pocket for the business cards Sam had insisted I order before the expo. Maya took it, glanced at it briefly, then handed me her own. A sleek, minimalist design with the logo of a major game developer I immediately recognized. "We should talk," she said simply, before disappearing into the crowd. Later, I showed Sam her card, still confused by the encounter. His eyes widened. "Prism Interactive approached you? They're one of the most innovative studios in the industry. Their art direction wins awards consistently." "She just said we should talk," I clarified, not wanting to overstate the significance. "Vanessa, people like Maya Lin don't waste time on courtesy conversations," Sam said seriously. "If she showed interest in your work, that's meaningful." That night, I received an email from Maya inviting me to breakfast the following morning to discuss potential opportunities. I stared at the message, a strange sense of vertigo washing over me. 6 months ago, I'd been lying on Zoe's fold-out couch, questioning every life choice that had led me to that point. Now I was fielding interest from industry leaders. I met Maya at a quiet cafe near the convention center. Unlike the chaos of the expo, our conversation was focused and direct. She asked about my background, my influences, my process. I spoke honestly about my journey: art school, the struggles in New York, finding my voice through the Horizon Project. I omitted the details about my family, those wounds still too raw to share with a stranger. After listening attentively, Maya placed a tablet on the table between us, displaying what appeared to be concept art for a new game. A world of vibrant, surreal landscapes populated by beings that existed somewhere between human and abstract. "We're developing a narrative-driven experience that explores themes of identity and transformation," she explained. "Your aesthetic would be perfect for certain elements we're struggling to visualize." My heart raced as I processed her words. "Are you offering me work?" "I'm offering you a consultation contract initially," Maya clarified. 3 months, with the potential for a senior artist position if the project moves forward as planned. The pay would be significantly higher than industry standard, given the experimental nature of the work. She named a figure that made me grateful I was sitting down. It was more than double what Horizon was paying me, enough to afford a comfortable apartment in almost any city, build substantial savings, and still have disposable income. "I'd need to discuss this with Horizon," I said, thinking of the commitment I'd just made to them. They've been incredibly supportive. Maya seemed to respect that response. "Of course, we're not looking to poach talent unethically. Talk to them. See if there's a way to fulfill your obligations while taking on this new opportunity. The consultation work could be done on a part-time basis initially." We parted with a handshake and her assurance that a formal offer would arrive by email within days. I walked back to the convention center in a daze, struggling to process how dramatically my professional prospects had changed in less than 48 hours. Sam's reaction to the news surprised me. Instead of disappointment, he showed genuine excitement. "This is how careers are built in our industry," he explained. "Connections, opportunities, stepping stones. You've outgrown us faster than expected, but that's a good thing." His generosity in that moment, putting my career development above Horizon's immediate needs, was yet another contrast to my family's self-centered reaction to my ambitions. Sam helped me work out a transition plan that would allow me to complete my commitments to Horizon while beginning the consultation work with Prism. On the flight back to Chicago, I felt a strange sense of disorientation. The trajectory of my life had altered so dramatically that I could barely reconcile my current reality with where I'd been just months before. The unexpected lifeline of the Horizon opportunity had led to something even greater with Prism. Path opening to possibilities I hadn't dared to imagine. As the plane descended through clouds, I realized I was no longer defining myself in opposition to my family's expectations. I was building something authentic and valuable on my own terms. The pain of their rejection hadn't disappeared, but it had diminished in importance, overshadowed by the genuine recognition I'd found in the professional world. For the first time since that rainy night when I'd stood on my parents' doorstep, with a suitcase at my feet, I felt truly free of their judgment. This unexpected lifeline hadn't just saved me from financial insecurity. It had begun to heal the deeper wounds of believing I wasn't good enough, that my dreams were unworthy of support. The realization brought tears to my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of release, of letting go. I was moving forward, not because I needed to prove my family wrong, but because I'd found a path that was undeniably right for me. The formal offer from Prism Interactive arrived 3 days after I returned to Chicago. The terms were even better than Maya had outlined during our breakfast meeting. The consultation fee was generous, the potential full-time position included, benefits I'd never had before, and there was even a relocation stipend should I decide to move closer to their main studio in Los Angeles. "This is life-changing," Zoe declared as we reviewed the contract together in a coffee shop. "You need to celebrate." Celebration felt premature. After years of instability, I found it difficult to trust this sudden turn of fortune. "Let's wait. Until I've actually started," I said. "Things could still fall through." Zoe rolled her eyes. "Always preparing for the worst. That's another habit you picked up from your family." Her observation stung with its accuracy. My parents had always approached life with suspicion, expecting disappointment, mistrusting opportunity, viewing optimism as naivete. I'd internalized their pessimism without realizing it. "You're right," I admitted. "I should at least acknowledge this milestone." That evening, Zoe and her girlfriend Tara took me out for dinner at an upscale restaurant overlooking the Chicago River. The kind of place I'd walked past but never entered, assuming it was beyond my means. As we toasted with sparkling wine, I felt a tentative happiness bloom inside me. "To new beginnings," Zoe said, raising her glass. "And to endings," Tara added. "Sometimes the best things in life start when something else ends." Their words resonated deeply. The ending of my relationship with my family, painful as it had been, had created space for these new connections, new opportunities, new versions of myself to emerge. The following week, I signed a 6-month lease on a modest studio apartment in Chicago's uptown neighborhood. It was small, but entirely mine, the first time I'd lived alone without roommates or family. The monthly rent was less than half of what I'd be earning from Prism, allowing me to build savings while working remotely. Moving day was both exhilarating and sobering. My possessions fit into 6 boxes and 2 suitcases, a visual representation of how little I'd accumulated at 26. No furniture, few decorations, minimal kitchenware. The apartment came with a basic bed and desk, but everything else would need to be acquired. "It's a blank canvas," Elena said encouragingly when I sent her photos. "An opportunity to build exactly the life you want, piece by piece." Her perspective shifted my thinking. Rather than seeing the emptiness as a reminder of what I lacked, I began viewing it as potential, space waiting to be filled with intentional choices rather than inherited obligations. My first major purchase was a professional-grade drawing tablet and dual monitor setup, tools that would enhance my work, for both Horizon and Prism. Next came a comfortable chair, proper lighting, and ergonomic accessories. I was investing in myself, in my career, in the belief that this opportunity wasn't a fluke, but the beginning of something sustainable. Working with Prism challenged me in ways I hadn't anticipated. The project was ambitious and experimental, game-exploring themes of identity and belonging through surreal visual storytelling. Maya expected me to push boundaries, to develop concepts that transcended conventional game aesthetics. "We're not looking for what's already been done," she explained during one of our virtual meetings. "We're looking for what hasn't been imagined yet." The freedom was both terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time, I wasn't adapting my style to meet someone else's vision. I was being asked to create the vision itself. The work demanded vulnerability, requiring me to draw from my personal experiences to inform the imagery of transformation and alienation central to the game's narrative. During late nights at my drawing table, I found myself unconsciously incorporating elements of my own journey into the character designs. Figures emerging from restrictive structures, beings in transition between defined states, individuals finding power in difference rather than conformity. I created visual metaphors for rejection, resilience, and rebirth without explicitly intending to. Maya noticed. "There's something authentic happening in these designs," she commented during a review session. "They feel lived rather than merely observed." Her insight gave me pause. Was I ready to transform my pain into art so publicly? There was power in it, certainly, but also exposure. Yet, as I continued developing the concepts, I realized this sublimation of personal experience into creative expression was healing me in unexpected ways. 3 months into the consultation contract, Maya scheduled a one-on-one call outside our regular meeting structure. My stomach tightened with anxiety, assuming bad news. Instead, she offered me the senior artist position we'd discussed, with a salary that exceeded even the generous consultation fee. "The team is unanimous," she said. "Your vision is essential to this project. We want you on board permanently." The position would require periodic travel to Los Angeles for collaborative sessions, but allow me to remain based in Chicago. After careful consideration, I accepted. The stability of a permanent role combined with the creative fulfillment of meaningful work felt like the foundation I'd been seeking. That evening, I FaceTimed with Elena to share the news. Her eyes glistened, with tears of pride. "I wish your parents could see who you've become," she said softly. The comment reopened a wound I'd been trying to ignore. Despite everything, some childish part of me still yearned for their approval, their acknowledgement that I'd found a valid path. "They wouldn't see it," I replied, my voice tight. "They'd find a way to diminish it." Elena's expression softened with understanding. "Probably. But that's their limitation, not yours." As I settled into my new role at Prism, I began expanding my professional network. Maya introduced me to other artists and designers in the industry. I joined online communities focused on game art and digital illustration. I attended virtual panels and workshops, sometimes as a participant, occasionally as a presenter sharing insights from my work at Prism. With financial stability came the freedom to be more selective about projects. I maintained a small freelance practice alongside my Prism work, choosing collaborations based on creative interest rather than economic necessity. My portfolio grew more diverse, showcasing a range of styles and applications while maintaining the distinctive visual language that had become my professional signature. 1 year after my brother's cruel dismissal, I barely recognized my own life. The frightened, desperate young woman who had stood in her parents' dining room, pleading for understanding, seemed like a stranger. In her place was someone more confident, more grounded, more certain of her own worth. My apartment had evolved from an empty shell to a personalized space that reflected my aesthetic sensibilities. Art books filled custom shelves, plants thrived on windowsills, and carefully selected furniture created a comfortable work-life environment. The walls displayed framed prints of my professional work, alongside personal projects, a visual timeline of my creative evolution. I'd developed friendships beyond Zoe, connecting with neighbors in my building and fellow creatives in Chicago's vibrant art community. Weekend brunches, gallery openings, and occasional dinner parties replaced the isolation that had characterized my early months in the city. Through it all, I maintained contact with Elena, whose unwavering belief had sustained me during my darkest moments. Our weekly calls became a touchstone, a reminder of continuity amid so much change. She kept me connected to the best parts of my past without allowing me to be dragged down by the worst. "Have you heard anything from your family?" she asked during one of our conversations, broaching the topic carefully. "Nothing direct," I admitted. "I still check their social media occasionally, though I know I shouldn't." My brother's company had expanded, earning recognition in regional business publications. My parents appeared in photos from community events, their expressions unchanged. From my childhood memories, they seemed to have adjusted completely to my absence, their lives continuing without disruption. "Does it still hurt?" Elena's question was gentle but direct. I considered before answering. "Differently. It's less raw, more disappointing. Like realizing someone you believed in never actually existed." My healing wasn't linear. There were still nights when memories ambushed me. My mother's silent nod of agreement with Dominic's cruel words, my father's dismissal of my ambitions, the coldness of that final text message asking me to apologize for wanting autonomy. During those moments, the pain would resurface, sharp and fresh. But increasingly, those episodes were outnumbered by days of genuine contentment, of pride in what I was building. The foundation of my new life grew stronger with each intentional choice, each professional achievement, each authentic connection. In late autumn, as I approached the anniversary of my departure from my hometown, I received an unexpected email from Professor Matthews, my former community college instructor, who had written a recommendation for the residency application. "Thought you might be interested in this opportunity," his message began, with a link to an arts education initiative seeking professionals to mentor young artists in underserved communities. The program needed digital artists who could conduct virtual workshops with high school students considering creative careers. The request resonated deeply. How different might my journey have been if I'd had access to working professionals who understood the path I was trying to forge? If I'd had validation from someone other than Elena that my ambitions were legitimate, my talents worth nurturing. I applied immediately, offering to develop a workshop series specifically for young artists interested in game development and digital illustration. Within weeks, I found myself conducting virtual classes with students across the country, many from backgrounds similar to my own: small towns, unsupportive environments, limited resources. "How do you know if you're good enough?" a quiet girl asked during one session, her uncertainty painfully familiar. "You don't, not at first," I answered honestly. "You just have to keep creating until the evidence becomes undeniable. To yourself first, then to others." Teaching these students became an unexpected source of healing. Each time I encouraged their experiments, celebrated their progress, or helped them navigate technical challenges, I was also speaking to my younger self, offering the support I had craved. The foundation I was building extended beyond career and home to include this new dimension of giving back, of transforming my difficult experiences into guidance that might ease another's path. It wasn't erasing the pain of my family's rejection, but it was repurposing it into something constructive, something meaningful. As the second year of my new life began, I felt myself standing on solid ground for perhaps the first time in my adult life. The foundation wasn't just financial security or professional recognition, though those elements were crucial. It was a deeper sense of knowing my own worth, of trusting my capabilities, of believing in my resilience. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them from this position of strength, a strength built not despite my family's betrayal, but in significant ways because of it. Their rejection had forced me to find resources within myself I might never have discovered otherwise. The foundation was set. Now it was time to build something extraordinary upon it. The game we'd been developing at Prism Interactive, tentatively titled Metamorphosis, was approaching its first major milestone. After 18 months of intensive work, we were preparing to unveil a playable demo at GDC, the Game Developers Conference, the industry's most prestigious annual event. "Your art direction has become the defining feature of this project," Maya told me during our pre-conference briefing. The marketing team wants you front and center during the presentation. The prospect of speaking before hundreds of industry professionals sent a wave of anxiety through me. I'd grown comfortable with small group presentations and teaching, workshops to students, but this was an entirely different level of exposure. "I'm not sure I'm the right person," I protested. "Wouldn't one of the lead designers be better?" Maya's response was immediate and firm. "This game's visual identity is uniquely yours, Vanessa. No one else can speak to it with the same authority." Her confidence was flattering but terrifying. As I prepared for the conference, I realized this moment represented a significant transition. I was no longer just a contributing artist. I was becoming a creative leader with a distinctive voice and vision. The recognition brought new pressures and expectations. San Francisco's familiar skyline greeted me as my flight descended. This visit felt markedly different from my first trip 2 years earlier. Then, I'd been a wide-eyed newcomer, grateful for any opportunity. Now, I returned as a respected professional whose work would be showcased on one of the industry's biggest stages. The Prism team occupied a luxury suite at the conference hotel, another indicator of how much had changed. As we rehearsed our presentation the night before the demo reveal, I felt an unfamiliar sense of confidence creeping in. I knew this work intimately. I believed in it. Perhaps I could do this after all. The next morning, as I stood backstage waiting to be introduced, Maya squeezed my shoulder reassuringly. "Remember, you've earned this moment," she said. "Own it." When my name was called, I walked onto the stage feeling as though I was experiencing a strange dream. The audience, a sea of faces illuminated by the glow of the giant screens displaying my artwork, appeared both intimidating and unreal. Metamorphosis began with a simple question. I started, my voice shakier than I'd hoped. How do we visually represent transformation, not just physical change, but the evolution of identity? As I continued, describing my approach to the game's distinctive aesthetic, my nerves gradually subsided. The audience seemed genuinely engaged, leaning forward as I explained the symbolic language embedded in the character designs and environments. By the time I introduced the playable demo, my initial terror had transformed into an unexpected exhilaration. The response exceeded our most optimistic projections. Industry publications praised the game's innovative visual style. Social media buzzed with screenshots and clips. Multiple publishers expressed interest in distribution partnerships. But most surprisingly to me, my name began appearing in articles and discussions about emerging talent in game art direction. "You've arrived," Maya said matter-of-factly during our post-conference debrief. "Now we need to talk about what's next." Her words triggered an alarm in me. Throughout my life, moments of success had often been followed by unexpected setbacks. I'd learned to be wary of apparent turning points. "What do you mean? What's next?" I asked cautiously. "Your contract with us was primarily for Metamorphosis," she explained. "We're obviously interested in extending it, but you should know that you have options now. Multiple studios inquired about you during the conference." The revelation was disorienting. After years of struggling for opportunities, to suddenly have choices felt almost unnatural. Maya wasn't pressuring me to decide immediately, but she was encouraging me to think strategically about my career path rather than simply accepting whatever came next. Back in Chicago, I found myself at a surprising crossroads. Prism had offered me a promotion to art director with a substantial salary increase. 2 other major studios had reached out with compelling offers. Meanwhile, my freelance inquiries had quadrupled since the conference, many from high-profile clients willing to pay premium rates. For the first time since leaving my family's home, I needed to make decisions based not on necessity, but on preference. It was a privileged position, yet strangely paralyzing. Each option offered different advantages and potential paths forward. "You need to figure out what success looks like for you now," Zoe advised over dinner at my apartment. "Not just professionally, but personally." Her question echoed in my mind for days afterward. What did I actually want? Financial security had been my primary goal for so long that I'd rarely allowed myself to consider broader aspirations. Now that basic stability was achieved, larger questions emerged about purpose, fulfillment, and legacy. I decided to take a 2-week vacation, my first real break since starting at Prism, to gain perspective. Elena suggested I visit her in my hometown, an idea I initially dismissed as too painful. But after consideration, I realized returning on my own terms might help me process unresolved emotions. You won't even recognize the place, Elena said when I expressed hesitation. The new highway bypass has changed everything. And you'll stay with me, of course. The flight to the small regional airport near my hometown felt like traveling backwards in time, yet everything looked different through my changed perspective. The landscape that had once seemed limiting now appeared simply familiar. The town that had felt suffocating now seemed merely small. Elena's home welcomed me with its warm colors and art-filled walls. We spent evenings on her porch, discussing everything from art philosophy to local gossip. She tactfully avoided mentioning my family directly, though I knew she still occasionally saw them at community events. 3 days into my visit, while helping Elena in her garden, I asked the question that had been hovering between us. Have they ever asked about me? She paused, trowel in hand, considering her response carefully. Your mother has. Not directly, but she finds ways to steer conversations toward you. I think she regrets what happened, though she'd never admit it. The information settled in my chest, a complex weight of sadness, vindication, and lingering hurt. And my father. And Dominic? Your father is harder to read. Dominic. She hesitated. Dominic seems threatened by any mention of you. I think he senses that you found success on your own terms, and it challenges his worldview. I nodded, unsurprised. My brother had always defined himself through comparison. His choices were right because mine were wrong. My success would undermine the narrative he'd constructed. Later that afternoon, walking alone through the town's small historic district, I passed my brother's office. The company logo had been updated, and an impressive sign declared, Wilson Construction and Development, building our community's future since 1985. Through the large front window, I could see Dominic at his desk, engaged in what appeared to be an intense phone conversation. I stood watching for a moment, struck by how unchanged he looked despite the passing years. The same authoritative posture, the same serious expression. I wondered if he was happy, if the path he'd chosen, the path our parents had predetermined, had brought him fulfillment. Before he could notice me, I continued walking, a strange calmness settling over me. I had expected this encounter, even from a distance, to trigger anger or pain. Instead, I felt a detached compassion. Dominic was exactly where and who he had always planned to be. I had become someone neither of us could have imagined. That evening, as Elena and I prepared dinner, I shared my realization. I think I've been defining success in opposition to them, proving them wrong rather than figuring out what's right for me. She nodded thoughtfully. That's natural after rejection. But at some point, you need to stop letting them dictate your choices, even through resistance. Exactly, I agreed. I've been reactive, taking opportunities as they came, grateful for any recognition. I haven't been strategic about where I actually want to go. This insight clarified my thinking about the professional decisions awaiting me back in Chicago. Each offer represented a different possible future. The Prism promotion would cement my position in a respected studio. The competing job offers promised new challenges and environments. The freelance path would provide maximum freedom, but less stability. For the remainder of my hometown visit, I avoided areas where I might encounter my family, while using the time to reflect on my priorities. On my final evening, Elena and I shared a bottle of wine on her porch, watching fireflies emerge in the twilight. "I've decided to decline the Prism promotion," I told her, "and the other full-time offers." She raised an eyebrow. "Going freelance exclusively?" "Not exactly." I took a deep breath, articulating a plan that had been forming throughout my visit. "I'm going to start my own studio. Something small and focused, centered on my artistic vision rather than fitting into someone else's." The idea had crystallized. Gradually, I'd observed how the best aspects of my Prism experience came when I had creative autonomy. I'd noted which freelance projects brought the most satisfaction. Invariably, those where clients sought my distinctive approach, rather than requesting imitations of existing styles. "That's ambitious," Elena said, though her tone conveyed approval rather than doubt. "It is," I acknowledged, "but I have savings, industry connections, and a growing reputation. Maya's even offered to be an advisor and help me navigate the business aspects." The plan represented a strategic reset, a deliberate pivot from employee to entrepreneur, from contributor to creator. It would mean leaving the security of established studios for the uncertainty of building something that was entirely mine. The parallels to my departure from my family's home weren't lost on me, but this time the choice came from confidence rather than desperation. Upon returning to Chicago, I implemented my plan methodically. First, I had candid conversations with Prism's leadership, explaining my decision to complete the Metamorphosis project but decline the art director position. To my surprise, they proposed a compromise, a flexible consulting arrangement that would allow me to maintain connection with the studio while pursuing my independent venture. Next, I began the process of establishing my own business entity, Chrysalis Studio, a name that acknowledged transformation as both my personal journey and artistic theme. I secured legal and financial advisors, developed a business plan, and began converting a portion of my apartment into a professional workspace. Most importantly, I defined a clear creative philosophy for the studio. We would focus on narrative art that explored themes of identity and change. We would value artistic integrity over commercial trends. We would collaborate with clients and partners who respected our distinct aesthetic and process. The transition wasn't seamless. There were moments of doubt, particularly when declining lucrative offers in favor of uncertain independence. But, with each step, I felt increasing alignment between my external work and internal values. 3 months after making the decision, I launched Chrysalis Studio's website and social media presence, featuring selected works from my portfolio alongside a manifesto outlining our approach. The response exceeded my expectations. Within weeks, inquiry emails filled my inbox, many from clients who specifically referenced my GDC presentation as their introduction to my work. My first major commission as studio founder came from an unexpected source, a prestigious art museum developing an interactive installation exploring digital identity. The project budget allowed me to bring on 2 part-time assistants and upgrade my equipment. More significantly, it positioned Chrysalis as a serious creative entity, rather than merely a freelancer operating under a business name. As autumn approached, bringing the 3rd anniversary of my family's rejection, I found myself in a position that would have seemed impossible during those early days on Zoe's fold-out couch. I had financial security, professional recognition, creative autonomy, and a clear vision for my future. The strategic reset had transformed potential into direction. One evening, as I reviewed concept sketches for an upcoming project, I received a notification from a professional networking site. "Dominic Wilson has viewed your profile." The alert sent an unexpected jolt through me. After years of no contact, this digital proximity felt both invasive and significant. Had curiosity finally overcome his resentment? Had he heard about my recent successes? Was this the first tentative step toward some form of acknowledgement? I closed the notification without taking any action. Whatever my brother's reasons for checking my profile, they were his to navigate. My path forward was clear, strategically planned, and no longer contingent on anyone's validation but my own. The strategic reset was complete. I had transformed from someone defined by rejection to someone defined by intention, making deliberate choices about my creative work, my business model, and my personal priorities. The next phase of my journey would be built on this foundation of clarity and purpose. As I turned back to my work, I felt a sense of closure on one chapter and excitement for the next. Whatever came, success or setback, recognition or challenge, I would face it with the confidence of someone who had found her true direction. The first year of running Chrysalis Studio taught me that entrepreneurship was a different kind of struggle than employment. The creative freedom was exhilarating, but the administrative responsibilities were overwhelming. Each day brought new challenges: managing client expectations, coordinating with contractors, handling finances, and still finding time for my own artistic work. "You need systems," Maya advised during one of our monthly mentoring calls. "And eventually, you'll need people to run those systems for you." She was right, but scaling required capital. While I was earning more than ever before, expansion meant risk. Each new hire, each equipment upgrade, each larger office space represented a leap of faith. The memory of financial insecurity still lingered, making each decision feel momentous. Despite these pressures, Chrysalis was growing steadily. Our portfolio expanded to include work for gaming studios, tech companies, cultural institutions, and publishers. My team grew from 2 part-time assistants to 5 full-time employees, each selected not just for technical skills, but for alignment with the studio's artistic philosophy. 8 months after founding Chrysalis, I faced my first major crisis. A high-profile tech client, whose project represented nearly a third of our quarterly revenue, abruptly canceled their contract. The official reason was internal restructuring, but industry gossip suggested they'd been acquired by a larger company with different creative priorities. The sudden financial gap threatened everything I'd built. Without that revenue, I couldn't meet payroll for more than 2 months. The prospect of laying off my team, people who had trusted my vision and left secure positions to join Chrysalis, was devastating. "You have options," my financial advisor assured me during an emergency meeting. "You could take out a business loan, seek investors, or reduce expenses temporarily." Each solution carried significant drawbacks. A loan would create debt pressure during an already precarious time. Investors would likely demand partial ownership and influence over creative decisions. Reducing expenses almost certainly meant losing valued team members. For 3 sleepless nights, I wrestled with the decision. On the 4th morning, exhausted but resolute, I called a team meeting. "I'm going to be completely transparent," I began, addressing the 5 concerned faces around our conference table. "We've lost the Nexus project, which leaves a significant gap in our finances." I outlined the situation in detail, sharing the actual numbers rather than vague reassurances. Then, I proposed a temporary solution. I would forego my own salary for 3 months and reduce my ownership draw. Everyone else would maintain their current compensation and benefits. "This buys us time to secure new clients without compromising our team or our quality," I explained. "I believe in what we're building here, and I'm willing to make this personal sacrifice to protect it." The response was immediate and unexpected. Noah, our senior designer, spoke first. "What if we all shared the burden? I'd rather take a small, temporary pay cut than see you shoulder this alone." One by one, the others agreed. Within an hour, we had restructured our finances to distribute the impact, preserving everyone's job while significantly extending our runway. The experience transformed Chrysalis from a collection of employees into a true team united by shared purpose. More importantly, it forced me to become a more transparent leader, one who trusted others with both good news and bad. The following weeks tested our collective resilience. I leveraged every industry connection, followed up on dormant leads, and pitched new concepts to potential clients. The team responded with increased productivity and creativity, aware that our survival depended on demonstrating exceptional value. 6 weeks into our financial crisis, our persistence paid off. A renowned animation studio reached out about a collaboration on a high-concept short film, a project with creative prestige though modest immediate compensation. More significantly, a major gaming company contacted us regarding character design for their upcoming flagship title, offering a contract that would more than replace the lost revenue. "You built this," Maya said when I called to share the news. "Not just the studio, but the reputation and relationships that saved it during crisis." Her words highlighted an important truth. The professional network I'd cultivated over the past 3 years had become a crucial safety net. Unlike the conditional support of my family, these relationships were based on mutual respect and genuine appreciation for my work. As Chrysalis stabilized, I made structural changes to protect against similar vulnerabilities. We diversified our client base to avoid over-reliance on any single project. We created a financial reserve specifically for crisis management. We developed systems to balance creative innovation with business sustainability. The experience had been harrowing but educational. I emerged with deeper business acumen and stronger leadership skills. The team, having weathered adversity together, operated with increased cohesion and commitment. By our 18-month anniversary, Chrysalis had outgrown my apartment. We leased a proper studio space in Chicago's West Loop, an industrial loft, with high ceilings, abundant natural light, and room for future expansion. The day we moved in, hanging our logo on the brick wall by the entrance, I experienced a surge of pride unlike anything I'd felt before. "We should document this," said Kai, our newest team member who handled our social media presence. "It's a significant milestone." The resulting photo, me standing beneath the Chrysalis logo surrounded by my team, became a pivotal moment in an unexpected way. Kai posted it on our professional accounts with a brief story of the studio's growth. The post gained traction within industry circles, then expanded to broader creative communities, eventually being featured in a digital arts publication. 3 days later, I received a text message from a number I didn't recognize. "Is that really you, running a design studio in Chicago?" The informal tone suggested someone who knew me personally rather than professionally. I responded cautiously, "Yes, this is Vanessa Wilson. Who's asking?" The reply came quickly. "It's Trisha. From high school? I saw your photo in that article about innovative design studios." The name triggered a distant memory, a former classmate I'd barely known, someone who had moved in different social circles. "Of course, Trisha. Nice to hear from you. How are you?" What followed was a strange conversation that gradually revealed her true purpose. After minimal pleasantries, she mentioned that she still lived in our hometown and regularly saw my parents at community events. "They never mention you," she wrote. "I had no idea you'd become so successful. Does your family know?" The question carried an undertone of gossip-seeking that made me uncomfortable. I responded with deliberate vagueness. "We're not in regular contact. How's your family doing?" Her next message confirmed my suspicion about her motives. "That's so sad. Family rifts are difficult. I could let them know about your accomplishments if you'd like. I see your mother at church every Sunday." I declined her offer politely but firmly, then changed the subject. The exchange ended soon after, but it left me unsettled. For the first time, I realized that news of my professional success might eventually reach my family through the small-town grapevine. The thought provoked a complex mixture of emotions: satisfaction that they might finally see my value, anxiety about potential contact, and surprisingly, concern about how such news might affect them. That evening, I found myself searching social media for updates on my family, something I hadn't done in over a year. My father's construction company had a basic website that hadn't changed since my last viewing. My mother appeared in photos from church fundraisers. Dominic's business profile showed recent awards and community leadership positions. Their lives continued, apparently unchanged by my absence. The realization was both painful and freeing. I had spent countless hours imagining their reactions to my journey, their regret, their surprise, perhaps even their pride. But the truth was likely more mundane. They had simply continued on their predetermined paths, rarely thinking about the daughter who had chosen differently. The following day, as I reviewed designs with my team, I made a conscious decision to refocus on the present rather than the past. I had created something meaningful, a thriving business, a supportive community, a body of work I was proud of. Whether my family ever acknowledged these achievements was increasingly irrelevant to my daily reality. This perspective was tested 3 months later when Chrysalis received an industry award for our work on the animation collaboration. The short film, titled Emergence, had become a critical darling, praised for its innovative visual storytelling. As the art direction studio behind its distinctive look, we were invited to the ceremony in New York. Standing on stage with my team, accepting the glass trophy that validated our creative vision, I scanned the audience out of habit, half expecting to see familiar faces from my hometown. Of course, they weren't there. This was my world now, populated by people who recognized and valued what I could create. The award generated significant media coverage, including a profile in a national arts magazine that detailed my journey from struggling freelancer to studio founder. The writer, who had interviewed me extensively, included biographical details about my Midwestern origins and art school education, though I had carefully avoided discussing my family situation. 2 weeks after publication, Elena called. Her voice carried an unusual tension. "Have you checked your email today?" "Not yet," I replied, immediately concerned. "What's wrong?" "Your mother reached out to me asking for your contact information," she said carefully. "She saw the magazine article. She said she wants to reconnect." The revelation hit me with unexpected force. After years of silence, my mother was making the first move toward contact. But why now? Was it genuine regret, or was it motivated by my newly public success? "What did you tell her?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "That I'd pass along her request, but the decision was entirely yours," Elena replied. "I didn't share any of your information." I thanked her for respecting my privacy, promising to consider the situation carefully. After we hung up, I sat at my desk, staring at the award we'd recently placed in our studio's reception area. The timing of my mother's outreach seemed too convenient to be coincidence. That evening, I discussed the situation with Zoe over dinner. Now engaged to Tara, she had remained my closest friend and most trusted confidant. "Do you think you're ready to hear what she has to say?" Zoe asked, practical as always. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to know if she's genuinely sorry. Another part suspects she's just curious about my success or wants to brag about having a daughter who won an industry award." "There's only one way to find out," Zoe pointed out, "but you can control the terms. You don't have to jump into a full reconciliation. You could start with an email or a phone call." Her advice was sound, but I needed time to process. This unexpected development had disrupted the careful equilibrium I'd established. Any contact with my family risked reopening wounds that had finally begun to heal. The next day at the studio, I found it difficult to focus. My team noticed my distraction but respectfully gave me space. By afternoon, I had made a decision. I would respond to my mother's outreach, but cautiously and on my own terms. I composed an email to Elena, authorizing her to share my professional email address, not my personal contact information, with my mother. "If she genuinely wants to reconnect," I wrote, she can reach out directly and explain why. The decision felt both terrifying and empowering. I was opening a door that had been firmly closed for years, but I was doing so from a position of strength rather than need. Whatever came through that door, sincere apology or superficial interest, I was now equipped to handle it without being devastated. As I pressed send, I reflected on how far I'd come in my journey through adversity. From the desperate young woman standing in the rain with a suitcase, to the established professional making deliberate choices about complex relationships. Each challenge, financial, professional, emotional, had built resilience I never knew I possessed. The studio crisis had taught me to lead through transparency. The social media encounter had shown me the reach of my professional reputation. Now, this potential family reconnection would test my emotional boundaries and self-worth in new ways. That night, as I walked home through Chicago's busy streets, I felt a strange sense of readiness. Whatever came next, whether further success, or new challenges, family reconciliation, or continued separation, I had proven to myself that I could navigate it without losing my center. The journey through adversity hadn't ended. Perhaps it never would. But I had learned to find purpose in the struggle, growth in the difficulty, and ultimately, power in the path I had chosen for myself. 3 days after giving Elena permission to share my professional email, my mother's message arrived. I was reviewing portfolio submissions when the notification appeared, her name landing like a stone in the calm pond of my afternoon. The subject line read simply, "Hello from your mother. Dear Vanessa," it began. "I hope this message finds you well. I saw the article about your design studio and your recent award. Congratulations on your success. It would be nice to catch up sometime. Your father and I are still in the same house. Dominic has his second child on the way. Best wishes, Mom." I read it repeatedly, searching for substance beneath the surface, remorse, warmth, genuine interest, but found only bland pleasantries and family updates. No acknowledgement of our estrangement or the circumstances of my departure. The brevity and superficiality clarified something important. This wasn't an attempt at reconciliation, but rather an acknowledgement of my public achievement. Now that external validation had confirmed my success, I was worth contacting again. After careful consideration, I crafted a measured reply. "Mom, thank you for reaching out. My life and career are indeed going well. I appreciate your congratulations. However, I think we both know that there are significant unresolved issues between us. Your email makes no mention of the circumstances under which I left home or the years of silence that followed. Before any catching up can happen, I would need acknowledgement of those events and the hurt they caused. I hope you can understand why this matters to me. Regards, Vanessa." My mother's response arrived 2 days later, still using passive language, "if you felt hurt," rather than "that we hurt you," dismissing my pain as oversensitivity and justifying Dominic's behavior. Most revealing was her final line suggesting reconnection was now appropriate because I'd established myself, according to their metrics of success. After discussing the exchange in therapy, I sent another carefully considered response. "Mom, thank you for your reply. I appreciate your recognition of my professional achievements, but I need to clarify something important. The hurt I experienced wasn't about being sensitive or making unconventional career choices. It was about being told, 'No one wants you.' Here by my brother, seeing you nod in agreement and being left to handle a crisis alone because my needs were deemed inconvenient. What hurt was the conditional nature of your support, only available if I conform to your expectations. My success doesn't validate my choices retroactively. Those choices were always valid, even when they involved struggle and uncertainty. If we're to have any relationship moving forward, it needs to be based on mutual respect and genuine acceptance, not achievement metrics. I'd be open to a conversation if you're willing to engage honestly about these issues. Vanessa." A month passed before her next message arrived, shorter but substantively different. Vanessa, your email has given me a lot to think about. You're right that we handled things poorly. I've regretted that nod many times over the years. Your father and I discussed reaching out after you left, but pride and uncertainty got in the way. Then time made it harder. When I saw the article about your success, it seemed like a natural opening. I now see how that appeared opportunistic. I don't expect immediate forgiveness, but I would like a chance to talk properly. Would you consider a phone call? Mom. The shift in tone was noticeable. Less defensive, more reflective, with explicit acknowledgement of specific harmful behavior. It wasn't a complete accounting or a full apology, but it represented progress. After careful preparation, I agreed to a Sunday evening call. When the time came, I positioned myself in my home office, surrounded by evidence of the life I'd built. Independently. "Hello, Mom," I answered, my voice steadier than I felt. "Vanessa," she replied, her tone carrying unfamiliar hesitancy. "It's good to hear your voice." Our conversation was awkward but substantive. She explained that seeing my success had triggered both pride and shame. Pride in my achievements, shame in her role in our estrangement. She admitted that her silent agreement with Dominic's rejection had been a betrayal of her responsibilities as a mother. "I was weak," she confessed. "Your father and Dominic have always been so certain about everything. I've spent my life deferring to their judgments, even when my instincts told me otherwise." The following week, Chrysalis finalized a partnership with a European animation studio, creating a joint venture that generated substantial industry coverage. 3 days later, Elena called with news that sent a jolt through my carefully constructed equilibrium. "Dominic came into my studio yesterday," she said without preamble. "He was asking questions about you. My brother, who had declared no one wanted me around, who had never reached out since my departure, was suddenly curious about my life." "What kind of questions?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. "How to contact you, whether I thought you'd be receptive, if I knew about your business success." She emphasized the last phrase with audible quotation marks. "He mentioned seeing the article about your studio's international expansion." I thanked her for the warning, uncertain how to process this development. The next day, I received a LinkedIn connection request from him. His profile showed his promotion to president of the family company following my father's semi-retirement. After careful consideration, I sent a brief message. "Dominic, I understand from Elena that you've been asking about me. If you wish to communicate, please do so directly rather than through third parties. I've had an initial conversation with Mom, which was a positive step. Any relationship between us would similarly require direct acknowledgement of past events and clarity about future expectations. Vanessa." His response came the same day. "Vanessa, congratulations on your company's success. I've been following your progress through industry publications. Impressive achievement. We should catch up sometime. Dominic." The message was notable for what it lacked: any reference to our estrangement, his role in my departure, or my request for direct acknowledgement. Like our mother's initial outreach, it focused exclusively on my professional achievements, while ignoring the personal dynamics that led to our separation. 2 weeks later, my assistant interrupted with unusual urgency. "There's someone here to see you. He says he's your brother." Dominic had come to Chicago to my studio without warning or invitation. After careful preparation, I met him in our conference room, maintaining professional distance despite the personal nature of his visit. "This is unexpected," I said. "Why are you here, Dominic?" "I wanted to see this studio I've been reading about," he replied. "Very impressive operation you've built." As our conversation progressed, the familiar pattern emerged. My worthiness of family connection directly tied to professional achievement rather than inherent value. He viewed my success as erasing rather than highlighting the wrongness of their rejection. "My success doesn't change what happened," I stated firmly. It doesn't erase the fact that you told me no one wanted me there, that Mom agreed, that I was left to fend for myself during a crisis. When he departed, I realized this encounter represented a meaningful victory, not because my brother had sought me out, but because I had engaged with him on my terms, confident, clear about my boundaries, unswayed by family pressure or old dynamics. The following week brought another unexpected communication. An email from my father, brief and unsentimental, yet representing another first victory. Acknowledgement from the family patriarch whose approval I had sought throughout childhood. These accumulating victories weren't just professional achievements but personal triumphs, developing confidence without arrogance, ambition without desperation, boundaries without bitterness. I had built a life reflecting my values rather than reaction against my family's rejection. When the invitation came to speak at my former art school's commencement ceremony, it felt like the culmination of these victories, large and small. Standing at the podium, addressing graduates embarking on their own uncertain creative journeys, I shared lessons learned from both struggle and success, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment, not because I had proven my family wrong, but because I had proven myself right. The 5th anniversary of my departure approached with perfect symmetry. My new studio space was complete, an expansive loft encompassing the entire top floor of a renovated industrial building in Chicago's West Loop. Floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the workspace with natural light, custom-designed stations accommodated. Our growing team and a dedicated gallery showcased our most significant projects. As we settled into the new space, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Your father and I would like to visit you in Chicago. Would that be possible sometime in the next month?" After consulting with my therapist, I proposed specific dates and clear parameters. They would stay at a hotel, not with me. We would meet first in a neutral setting before any visit to my home or studio. The duration would be limited to 2 days. To my surprise, they accepted these terms without negotiation. On a crisp autumn Saturday, I waited in a quiet cafe near Millennium Park, watching for their arrival. When they appeared, the sight was surreal. My parents in Chicago, in my world, seemingly unchanged yet fundamentally different because of the context. Our initial conversation circled around neutral topics before gradually moving toward substantive exchange. My father's questions focused on business metrics, employee count, operational structure, growth strategy. My mother commented on the more personal aspects of my life in Chicago. Neither directly addressed our estrangement until my mother tentatively asked if they could see my studio. The request represented a significant shift, moving from abstract recognition of my success to concrete engagement with my reality. "I'd plan to show you tomorrow," I admitted. "If you're ready, we could go now." As the elevator doors opened directly into our reception area, revealing the Chrysalis logo illuminated against exposed brick, I watched their reactions carefully. My mother's eyes widened with visible surprise, while my father's careful scrutiny of the space suggested genuine interest rather than mere obligation. "This is not what I expected," my mother finally said, taking in the open layout, modern furnishings, and project displays. "What did you expect?" I asked, genuinely curious. She hesitated. "Something smaller, perhaps. More bohemian?" Her uncertainty revealed how little they had understood my professional path, imagining perhaps a stereotypical starving artist studio rather than a thriving creative business. During the comprehensive tour, my father asked detailed questions about business structure while my mother commented on aesthetic elements. In the gallery area, displaying our work for various clients, my father paused before a wall dedicated to the Metamorphosis game project. "This was your first major success?" he asked, studying the intricate character designs. "Yes," I confirmed. "It opened many doors." He nodded slowly. "You took a risk that paid off, That's good business, whatever the industry. Coming from him, this was substantial praise. Acknowledgement not just of my artistic merit, but of my professional judgment. In my private office, my mother noticed the small framed sketch on my desk. An original drawing by Elena, inscribed with, "Create courageously." "You've stayed in touch with Elena all this time?" she asked, picking up the frame. "She believed in me when I needed it most," I replied simply. My mother's expression shifted, a flicker of something like shame crossing her features. She saw what we didn't, she acknowledged quietly. My father, standing by the window overlooking the Chicago skyline, turned at her words. "We were wrong," he said abruptly. "About your prospects, about your choices." Coming from him, a man who rarely admitted error, the statement carried significant weight. It wasn't an emotional reconciliation, but it was authentic to who he was, practical, direct, acknowledging factual misjudgment. "I appreciate that," I replied carefully. "Recognition of my professional success is meaningful. But there's also the personal aspect of what happened. Being told no one wanted me. Being left without support during a crisis." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "I've thought about that moment every day. My silence when Dominic said those terrible words. I should have defended you immediately. Instead, I failed you as a mother." "Why?" I asked, the question I'd carried for 5 years finally finding voice. "Why did you agree with him?" She looked down at her hands. "Fear. Dominic and your father were so certain about everything. What success looked like, how life should be lived. Going against them felt impossible. I worried that supporting your choices would create a permanent rift between us all. Instead, I lost you anyway." Her explanation wasn't justification, but it offered context I hadn't fully considered. The dysfunctional family dynamics that had constrained her choices just as they had attempted to constrain mine. My father spoke again. "I believed I was protecting you from disappointment. The creative field seemed too uncertain, too subjective. Construction, business, these were solid paths I understood." "That doesn't explain abandoning me when I needed medical help," I countered. He flinched visibly. "That was inexcusable. I've had time to reflect on that decision. It was selfish and wrong." "Where does Dominic stand in all this?" I asked, addressing the elephant in the room. My parents exchanged glances before my mother answered carefully. "Dominic is struggling with his own issues. The economic downturn has affected the construction business significantly. Some of his development projects have stalled. His pride makes admission difficult," my father added with unexpected insight. "He sees your success as somehow diminishing his own achievements." As our conversation continued, I realized we were engaged in the confrontation I had both feared and needed. Not dramatic accusations or tearful pleas, but honest recognition of harmful patterns and mutual responsibility for repair. The next day's lunch focused more on present circumstances than past grievances. We discussed the possibility of future visits and established boundaries and expectations, treating our reconnection as a gradual process rather than an immediate resolution. As we said goodbye, my mother hugged me with less hesitation than before. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. "Not just for your success, but for your strength in building this life on your own terms." My father, ever more comfortable with practical matters than emotional expression, handed me an envelope. "Some information about the estate planning," he explained. "Look it over when you have time. No pressure either way." Their acceptance of my autonomy, my right to determine the pace and parameters of our relationship, represented a fundamental shift from the controlling dynamic that had led to our estrangement. That evening, I called Elena to share the experience. "They actually saw me," I told her, still processing. "Not completely, perhaps, but more genuinely than ever before." "That's significant," she observed. not everyone gets that opportunity for recognition, especially from family who've been so resistant. It doesn't erase what happened, I acknowledged. But it does change how I carry it. Closure isn't always a neat package with a bow, Elena responded. Sometimes it's just enough understanding to move forward without being weighed down by the past. The confrontation had not provided perfect closure, but it had created sufficient understanding to move forward, both with cautious family reconnection and, more importantly, with my own life, unburdened by the weight of unaddressed rejection. In that sense, it represented a victory more meaningful than any professional achievement or financial success. 6 years after standing in the rain outside my family home, I found myself in a position that would have seemed impossible during those desperate days. Chrysalis Studio had won Studio of the Year. Our joint venture with European partners had produced a critically acclaimed series. Our team had expanded to 23 full-time employees across 3 departments. Most significantly, we had just completed the purchase of our studio building, the entire 5-story structure, not just our floor. The investment represented both practical expansion and symbolic achievement, permanent roots in Chicago, and tangible evidence of sustainable success. "Morning, boss," Noah greeted me as I stood by the windows overlooking the city. "Congratulations." Again on the building. Major milestone. "Thanks," I replied. "Still feels surreal." "Better get used to it," he grinned. "The Vanessa Wilson real estate empire is just beginning." The joke held unexpected weight. I had indeed become something I'd never anticipated. Not just a successful artist or studio owner, but a person of significant wealth and tangible assets. Later that day, our operations director approached with news that brought my personal and professional worlds into collision. "The Regional Business Journal is doing a feature on the building purchase," she explained. "They'd like to include some personal background, your journey from small-town Midwest to industry leader." The request triggered immediate consideration of how much of my story I wanted publicly shared. That evening, I called my mother to discuss the interview request. "They want background information," I said carefully, "about where I came from, how I started." Her silence conveyed understanding of the implicit question. "That's your story to tell, Vanessa," she finally replied. "We can't dictate how you frame your journey." The response reflected our evolving relationship, acknowledgement of my autonomy rather than defensive concern about family image. When the journalist arrived, I made a conscious choice toward authentic disclosure. My hometown wasn't particularly supportive of artistic ambitions, I explained. When I was 25, after struggling in New York, I returned home briefly, during a financial crisis. My family made it clear they didn't support my creative path. I left with virtually nothing and came to Chicago, where I rebuilt my life and career from scratch. "That must have been incredibly difficult," the journalist observed. "It was transformative," I replied. "Being told no one wants you here by my own family forced me to find strength I didn't know I possessed. That rejection became the foundation for everything I've built." When the article was published 2 weeks later, it presented my story with surprising nuance, balancing professional achievements with personal journey. The headline, "From Rejection to Renaissance: How Vanessa Wilson Built a Digital Arts Empire," captured the transformation narrative without sensationalizing family drama. My mother called the same day she received it. "Thank you," she said, emotion evident in her voice. "For being honest but not cruel. For finding a way to tell your truth without demonizing us." My father's response came via email. "Read the article. Impressed by your diplomatic handling of difficult history. You've built something remarkable, entirely on your own terms. That deserves respect." Dominic, predictably, did not respond directly. The article generated unexpected opportunities. Industry publications requested expanded interviews. A popular podcast invited me as a guest. A publishing company approached about a potential book on creative leadership and resilience. This increased visibility brought my story to young artists facing similar family opposition. Emails arrived describing situations painfully similar to my own early struggles, seeking advice about navigating unsupportive environments. Responding to this outreach became a meaningful extension of my work. I developed resources for creative individuals from non-artistic backgrounds, expanded our internship program, and established a small grant for artists facing financial emergencies. These initiatives transformed the pain of my experience into concrete support for others walking similar paths. The rejection that had once seemed purely destructive had ultimately generated constructive impact beyond my personal success. 7. Years after that rainy night, my life had been utterly transformed. I led a thriving creative enterprise with international recognition. I had financial security that would have seemed impossible during those early months of precarious survival. I had built meaningful relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. Most importantly, I had reclaimed my narrative. The rejection that was meant to diminish me had instead become the catalyst for building something greater than I had ever imagined. Not just a successful business, but a life of purpose, creativity, and authentic connection. When I occasionally think of that moment, standing in the rain, hearing, "No one wants you here," it no longer carries pain, but perspective. What was intended as an ending became instead the beginning of the most important journey of my life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.